Welcome to podcast 51 in the series of Who Let the Master Out. Well, we're almost done. The next episode after this will be number 52, and that'll be the last one in the series. Oh, don't be scared. There's one more series in the works, which I'll share more about in the last episode. So fret not. We've been talking about how supernatural beings of love from the other side were communicating through the use of soul cards. And today, I want to share some stories of when the knowing kicked in and guides and angels and those who passed over to the other side communicated with me without the use of cards. Now, card readings have been a consistent conduit for me to hear messages, but they're really not necessary. And I've had many experiences where information simply drops into my head and it feels like I'm remembering something that already happened. When I first began opening up to love energy, I had encounters here and there. But when I learned to quiet the voices of fear, I began to encounter situations on a regular basis. And it's so freaking exciting when it happens. So during the first year that I began to really open myself to the spiritual realm, I had a most bizarre, intriguing moment. I was living with my first boyfriend. And he worked days and I worked nights. So I was in the midst of spring cleaning frenzy, clearing out all the junk in one of our junk rooms in the basement. And I came across this briefcase that belonged to him. And I was moving it to another stack when I felt this urge to look inside it. But when I tried to open it, I couldn't because it was locked. It had one of those built-in 3-number combination locks. So I set it aside for later because I knew he would be home for lunch soon. Now, I'll be honest, I had devised a plan. I was going to tell him that I wanted to try using a briefcase so that all these file folders I brought home from work wouldn't get bent. And then he would have to open the briefcase to empty it out, and then I would be able to understand why I was drawn to know what was inside. So I had my plan all set, and I was ready. I heard him come in the front door upstairs, walked across the kitchen, and then he came down into the basement. And I was sitting on the floor, sorting out some box when he came into the room just to chat for a minute. So after some little small talk, I subtly brought up my idea about the briefcase, and the battle began. He pushed back a little bit, asking me why I wanted to use a briefcase. And I presented my desire of wanting pristine, unbent file folders. And he continued to push back, suggesting that, get a new one because this one's old and, it looks ugly. And I countered that I didn't want to spend the money on a new one in case I didn't like using one after all. And that's when the battle finally just kind of climaxed. He asked, why was I so adamant about getting into his briefcase? To which I wondered aloud to him why he was so adamant about not wanting to open it. Well, he had enough and he stormed out of the room and up the stairs and left and went back to work. So I sat there, well, poop. My plan didn't work. But wait. I sat up straight, sitting on the floor, looked around the room, and I spoke out loud to my guides. And I said, okay, guys, you're always around, so you would know what this combination is. Boom, boom, boom. 3 numbers popped into my head. So I immediately tried them. And the briefcase opened. Now, I admit, I did freak out a bit. I was just kind of sat there, but I opened it up, and there was just some adult materials inside. Nothing that I would have been super concerned about. So I closed up the case and piled it off with some other stuff. And then later, When my boyfriend came home from work, I was making dinner in the kitchen, and he walked past me in silence and descended into the basement. And he resurfaced, a few moments later with the briefcase in hand. And he handed it to me. I placed it on the kitchen table, and I acted like, attempted to open it, and it was locked. And just as he opened his mouth to tell me the combination, I quickly entered the numbers on there and opened it. His mouth dropped. And he had just replaced the material with a little small stuffed animal and apologized. But the knowing had started to really take over my life at this point. And before long, for several other reasons, we ended our relationship. There wasn't room for secrets any longer, and the whispers had made sure of that. My close friends get both the benefits and the challenges of my ability to hear the whispers. One thing I now know about myself is that my face doesn't hide much, especially to my close friends who know me very well. I was having dinner at a restaurant with one of these friends, and we were catching up. She had, moved out of state and had been gone a while and was back visiting. And she was, sitting across the table at dinner at a restaurant, and she was telling me about her journey out of state and the challenges she was facing. And then the whispers just kept on telling me a single phrase. And it was repeating in my head. And all they kept saying was, grow up, grow up, grow up. Now, the whispers were telling me to tell her that, and I was resisting because I feared her response. And it did seem kind of blunt. But the whispers grew louder and louder as our conversation continued. Finally, right in the middle of talking, she stopped, leaned over the dinner table, and commanded, "Just tell me what they're telling you. You're obviously fighting them." And I just laughed, totally busted. So I just let it roll from my lips. Grow up. She sat back in her chair, smiled, and said, "Well, that's what I needed to hear." One of my newer friends who also can just tell when they're talking to me, even she can just tell by my eyes for some reason. But I had met her by providing her a reading through a mutual friend. And the first time I met her, as I began the reading, I felt like a large crowd gather around us. And among them were two individuals who were so sassy to her. When I asked them who they were, they kind of presented themselves as twins to me. And when I explained it to her, it turned out she was like, "Yep, that would be my father and uncle," who had been, pretty much acted like they were twins when they were in the physical world. I eventually ended up naming them Frick and Frack because of how crazy they act when communicating with her. But she confirmed that their personalities were aligned with the characters that had been on Earth. So obviously all these things that they were telling her were based on the characteristics they had while they were here. And I asked her one day why, when they were coming through in my head, they always talked with an exaggerated, deep Southern drawl. And she answered plainly, that could be because they were both from Louisiana. So they had thick Louisiana accents when they were here. So we became quick friends, and we kept in touch quite a bit via text. And the spirit world just loved communicating with her. And on one occasion, she texted, "Good morning," and I quickly replied, "Good morning, sassafras." And I had no idea why I had said that, because the word sassafras is by no means in my regular vocabulary. She also was intrigued why I had used that phrase and asked me, why did you use that word? And I told her, I have no idea. It just popped into my head. And she let me know that, I'd been thinking about my mom this morning. And indeed, sassafras was what she used to call her. That's what her mom used to call her. On yet another occasion, when we were texting, Frick and Frack popped into the picture. And what I heard in my head was Wonder Woman in camouflage. And I had no idea. So I just texted it to her. And a few seconds after I sent that to her, I received a picture through text of Wonder Woman rings. She had just ordered them, and she had just received them in the mail the day before. You know, our loved ones really enjoy letting us know they are here and that they're very aware of what is happening in our lives. We are never alone, ever. A couple months later, after these things, I was with that same friend. And as we were talking about life and things like that, I felt a presence appear on her left side. And I don't physically see spirits yet anyway. And so it's more like a blip will appear on my radar. I sense that someone is there. And as I inquire of them, you know, who are you? And kind of focus in, then they start providing me with information. And in this case, I saw a picture in my mind's eye of a young man around 17 or 18, and he was dressed in like black jeans and a black short sleeve t-shirt. And my friend said, well, that could actually be a couple of people. And then he fed me more details. And I felt from him that he didn't really belong to any particular group, but he would make like half attempts to be involved with them. So he may have been like, he was goth, but he wasn't really. He was a geek, but not really. And he was an athlete, but not really. So he never really fully committed himself to any group. And that clarified things. She knew exactly who it was. And with one of her kind of boy crushes in high school. Now, his name escaped her, and she was trying to remember his name, and she couldn't, but she said, you know what, I'll text someone later, and we'll find out. I'm going to find out what his name was. And right then, it's like he touched something in my head and made me remember a movie I had seen, and the title of the movie was Tarzan, Lord of Greystoke. And so I said that out loud to her. I said, Tarzan, Lord of Greystoke. She just looked at me, and I burst out laughing. You know, the phrase kept repeating itself in my head, and I kept saying it out loud. He kept on wanting me to say, Tarzan, Lord of Greystoke. And I said it like 3 or 4 times. And I thought, I must be finally losing it, you know. But my friend and I we've learned, just put it on the back burner, and we'll see what happens. So the next morning, I received a text from her. And all it said was, his name was Wes Lord. What? Lord of Greystoke. You know, all we have to do to hear the whispers of love is quiet our fears, shut up, and listen. Next episode is the final episode. So we'll wrap it up, talk about a couple ways how the others from the other side communicate with us when we aren't listening and no one else around us is either. And I'll share a little bit about what's coming next. So until then, you know, light a candle. Sit in a quiet place. Let the flame burn away all fear and concern of anything outside of this moment. Breathe in, breathe out. Focus on your breath, and then listen. Listen with your heart. What do you hear? I love you.